we're going to take a look at Magnus BQ trigger. So one of the common use case for Magnus is you have a workflow that is scheduled to run daily, and it generates report based on some data from yesterday. So let's take a look. Here I have some toy sales data. For example, on New Year, there is an invoice, 1 toy train sold. There's another invoice, 1 toy kitchen being sold. And I have a workflow that generates report based on these daily data, which basically sums up the number of toys sold. For example, on New Year, this is my report. 10 basketballs sold, 6 teddy bears sold. Let's take a look at the workflow that generates this daily report. So this is my workflow. It is scheduled to run daily. It sets the reporting date to yesterday's date, and then it calls an API task to check to make sure that the sales data is there. And then lastly, I have this BQ task that generates the report. So there are a few drawbacks with this approach. First, I need to schedule the workflow at the time when I'm sure the data is there. Secondly, I need to add this failsafe to double check the data is there. And lastly, things happen. So if the sales data is late, I need to run this workflow manually. If the sales data is late for many days, I need to do this many times. So here is a summary for drawbacks. I need to schedule the workflow at the time when I'm sure the data is there. I need to add a failsafe to check the data is there. And if the data is late, I need to run the workflow manually. So this is where BQ trigger can help. So BQ trigger triggers a workflow to run when the BQ table is updated or deleted. And the workflow is run via remote workflow execution. So let's see how we can do that. So you go back to your workflow, you would disable the schedule because you don't need that anymore. It will be triggered. And then for the reporting date, we are going to get it from the table name itself. So this is very simple JavaScript. Basically, you're just taking the last 8 characters of the table name. That will give you the date. And then you disable this failsafe, you don't need that anymore. And then you click Save. Okay, and now we can go ahead and create a trigger. So add trigger, give it a name, select BigQuery as event type, and then select where your sales data is. It's DW demo and the table. Here I'm adding a wildcard so that any table prefix with this toy sales underscore will trigger my workflow to run. And then pick my workflow, which is DW demo. And then I want to pass into my workflow project of where the sales data is, data set of where the sales data is, and finally the table name of the sales data, and save the trigger. So to save time, I have already created this before. So let's get out of here. And there's my trigger. So let's see this in action. So I'm going to create some dummy sales data for January 4th. Okay, there you go. Sales data for Jan 4th. And now if I look at my workflow history, yep, the workflow is triggered to run. So if you click on that, you would see that the workflow is triggered by this sales table for Jan 4th. So if I refresh this, yeah, the workflow is running. Yep, it's done. So let's go to check out our report. Refresh. There you go. There's the report for Jan 4th. So of course, BQ trigger is not a one-size-fits-all solution. Since the BQ trigger it's backed by remote workflow execution, there is a quota of how many workflows you can put into queue per user, and that's 300. So BQ trigger is designed to work when the source table is batch updated. It is not designed if the table is updated in near real time, because you're going to hit the 300 waiting workflow quota. And multiple workflow instances can run at the same time. So for example, if the source data is late multiple days and they're being delivered all at once, then the workflow will kick up for all those days at once. So you need to make sure that your workflow can handle that. For example, if your workflow uses any intermediate tables or resources, you need to make sure that the names are unique. And lastly, triggers cannot be shared, so only the owner can see triggers. So that's all for BQ trigger. Here is what's next for trigger for Q1. We're planning to roll out workflow trigger. Workflow trigger triggers a workflow to run when a workflow completes. So that's it. Thank you for watching.